Adam,
Yeah,
is this an ad?
this is an ad for Mutinex. Mutinex are a marketing mix modelling company.
Why do I need one of those?
Well, then you can model the return on every single marketing decision you do.
So you wouldn't do an ad like this?
You'll never have to do an ad like this ever again.
Mutinex GrowthOS, your best decisions start here. For more information or to request a demo, visit mutinex.co. That's mutinex.co.
It's like, if you're in a hotel and someone walks in the front door and you go, oh, well, the concierge is credited for the sale. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about the principles of marketing. What modelling tries to do is it tries to go, well, let's not look at the individuals walking through the door. Let's just see if we kind of increased, billboards in front of Airport X. In that time period, did we see a lift in the overall amount of people walking through the door?
Well, welcome everyone. This is our first ever live recording of Black T-Shirt. So I hope some of you have listened to the podcast. Live from South by Southwest. We have a very special guest who we're going to introduce in a minute. But before we do, today is about how we measure creativity. And Adam, you have an agency called Tinkerbell, and your position is around measured magic. Do you want to explain to everyone what that is and how you think about that?
Yeah, so measured magic is shorthand for marketing sciences meets hardcore creativity. And so what we wanted to do was try to take an evidence-based or knowledge-based approach to creativity in the agency. And so therefore trying to be more confident about what will work, so hence the marketing sciences, and then trying to take measurement seriously internally. It's hard for a creative agency sometimes to do that because sometimes we don't have access to the data and so forth. When we're acting as the media agency for our clients, we have access to more data so we can take measurement more seriously. But that's what we're trying to do, trying to be more evidence-based in creative solutions.
And do you find that leads to better creative?
I think all creative needs to be, there's right and then great, and so I think it leads to right more often. So it helps you get into the zone of knowing what will likely work because you're building on the evidence of what has worked before, and then you need to take a creative leap from there. Brent, you're the CMO of I forget where you are now, Telstra, and you're known for doing some really creative work there over the last few years. Do you take measurement as seriously as you do the creative output?
Yeah, of course. But I think we can
because you're not. I reckon a lot of people would say you're not known for that, and I reckon it's kind of. I do know you quite well, so it's a bit of a Dorothy Dixer because I know you take it really seriously. But maybe just talk to us about the role you see. Measurement and how you measure your creative output, both going in and coming out of a creative idea, maybe.
Sounds like I've got a brand problem.
Maybe
Personally.
You personally, yeah, I think
yeah,
so.
no, look, we take measurement really seriously, but I'm definitely more focused on post measurement versus pre. I think we can get paralysed by data in the development of things. I think data's not going to give you the answer. You're going to have to take a creative leap. But post, yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time trying to understand how our work is working. Traditional brand tracking, of course. We've got a model, which is important to understand, how things are working. But I think the other really important thing is to try and, get a bit of a what? Do you want me to shut up? No. What?
No,
What?
sorry.
What?
I think you're getting sidetracked by what these things. The auto text is doing really weird things like I paralysed my daughter.
Did it say that? Did it say I paralysed my daughter? Yeah. I don't have a daughter, so I'm fine. I've got 3 boys. I'm fine. Maybe don't read.
No, exactly. I think you might.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, so I think, definitely spending a lot of time making sure we're proving the case for creativity. And I think it's really critical for any marketer that you are, I always say, make sure you're marketing inside the organisation and being really clear about what we're doing, how it's working, how it's creating value. And I think the really important thing that I've learned as a CMO is, your CFO does not want to talk to you about your social media metrics. It's just the wrong conversation. Have a conversation about how your creating future demand. Have a conversation about how you're helping defend margins by being able to charge more. Like, you know what I mean? Have a proper commercial conversation, not a silly marketing metrics conversation. And I would encourage everyone to do that. Anyway, it's not about you and me. We've got the expert here. Should we introduce him?
Before we talk to the expert for 1 sec,
all right.
one of the things you are known for, you work a lot with brand finance in the past, and they're a wonderful organisation that can help value the brand. But I like the fact that you're making that independent of you or your agencies. You're getting an independent voice into valuing the brand and the work you do, and I think that's kind of interesting.
Yep.
The other thing I think interesting that you do, that I've heard kind of myths around what you do, is having a internal creative scale that helps you assess the creative work on a scale of creativity from 1 to 10 or something.
Yep.
Can you just talk to us a little bit about the role of that and how it works?
Yeah. So I've never been a guest on my own podcast. I'm quite enjoying this. Anyway, so when I sort of first came to Telstra, I had a pretty big ambition, which is I wanted to be the most creative brand from this part of the world. And we took a lot of inspiration from AB InBev, who are the 2 times Market of the Year at Cannes. And one of the things that AB InBev did, they've got lots of brands in lots of countries, and they had incredible variability in their creative product. And so what they wanted to do is get a common language and a common way of assessing creative, and they have a scale. We created a scale as well at Telstra. It's a 1 to 10 scale. We mark every single output that we create every quarter. Now, we do about 600 briefs a year at Telstra, so that takes us about 3 or 4 hours in a room, going through everything from the biggest TV ad to the EDM, point of sale, everything. And we give it a score, and it's pretty methodical how we do it. And what we're doing there is we're starting to quantify our creative output and understand, is it getting better? We can look at it by channel, we can look at it by product, we can look at it by team. And the really important thing is not just a score, it's a coaching tool. So if there's scores that are lower than we thought they'd be, or we find problems, then we go and work with the teams on, let's have a look at the brief, have a look at the execution, try and unpack how we could have made it better and how we could have got a better score. The really important thing is we don't use it, we don't sit in rooms, look at creative work, when we get an idea on the table, go, oh, is this a 6 or is this a 6.5? Because you're immediately engaging the rational brain and you're immediately trying to quantify something that you can't quantify. We use it always post, to understand the quality of our output and to get learnings about our output. We never use it pre. I once saw it in a brief. We'd like an 8. I'm like, no, never in a brief, never pre. It's just a post tool. And it's really important because it can strangle creativity. Tools like that can really strangle creativity. So yeah, that's how we use it. And it's been a really useful tool for us.
Thanks for that. Do you want to introduce our guest now? And why he's
so
here?
he's sitting there uncomfortably waiting for us to include him in this conversation. So
I'm actually really enjoying it.
oh, thanks, Henry. So Henry Innis, who is the founder of Mutinex, who are a long-time supporter of Black Tea's, 2 seasons, that's long enough, but long-time friend of the pod, and really excited to have Henry here. I think he is leading one of the most interesting companies in the marketing space here in Australia, and great to have you on, Henry.
Thanks for inviting me on today, guys.
Your T-shirt's the wrong colour.
Well, I mean, I'm not creatively aligned, as you guys would know.
We once had Alex Bogusky on the podcast, famous Crispin Porter Bogusky leader, and he gave us a very long speech about what, as Black T-shirt wearers, Adam and I are draining the energy out of rooms.
That's right.
Right?
White, he wears white.
But
to
he
radiate.
white, which radiates energy, which is why he wears white. So all us people wear black, we're draining the energy out of rooms. Just FYI.
Henry, at the moment, if let's take broadly at the moment the state of measuring the creative output of organisations, what kind of big themes do you see at the moment? What do you think's happening in the world?
I think, firstly, it's horrifically complicated, and it's been complicated by a hell of a lot of different vendors coming into the market and things like that. Who are increasingly trying to introduce new things. A lot of older vendors constantly trying to reinvent themselves and reinvent the process. I think, I come back to the first principles of what do you want creativity to do, which is creativity, you want it to increase, the mental availability of product. I know that there was a big thing in MI3, but I'm still a big Byron Sharp believer. And I think what you want it to do is improve the memorability of your media too. And I think that building those memory structures is very important. There's different ways to do that. Do you kind of do it through qual, asking people, seeing how they respond to an ad and stuff like that in controlled environments? I'm not a huge fan of the small sample sizes of controlled environments because, if you ask people in a room with a bunch of soggy sandwiches, how did a certain piece of creative go? Like you're going to get a certain type of answer. But I think what's getting really exciting is how people are starting to link, unfortunately, pre-testing to commercial outcomes in the future and how it could affect the choices of media. So I think it's really interesting tools like System 1, bunch of others who are really trying to focus on how do we understand what the creative will do to the media's underlying effectiveness. Because the creative is the most important factor in whether or not an asset will perform. At Mutinex, we see, I would say hundreds of campaigns a week. And the underlying thing you can tell categorically is that you should model creative first, channel second. Because the creative modifies the effectiveness of the channel more than the channel itself often dictates the creative effectiveness. And where every MMM, for example, has traditionally been built around, trying to model channel by channel by channel. If you actually put the creative in the hierarchy and start to understand it from the creative lens, the MMM's way better predictively, which I think is just a really fascinating part of it.
There's an elephant in the room. Henry, what happened to your shoulder?
Yesterday, I was walking down the street, very jet lagged, on the phone, which was not the happiest conversation at the time. And I tripped and I stacked it and I think I broke it. So,
client calls can be very dangerous. So just coming back to what you were saying around modelling and how you think about modelling, just for everyone in the audience, attribution, right? It's been, I think, a big trap for a lot of marketers and been very popular with our, big tech company friends. Explain the difference between attribution and modelling and why is modelling much better at predicting commercial outcomes than attribution?
So I think you've got to look at the history of attribution, which was, where did last click attribution come from? It came about because Google did a quant study in 2008.
ZMOT.
ZMOT?
Sorry, moment.
No, it was earlier than that. So in 2006, they did a quant study that showed if they showed people the last touch of where people came from, where people came from on their website, that would lead to a 30% increase in search spend. And so they did that quant study, and it's all on a blog post called Urchin, which is, you can find it online. And they bought this paid analytics company at the time, which was a very, very big part of the kind of whole push for Google Analytics and stuff like that. And I think they've done wonderful things since. I think Google have been championing market mix modeling recently in a really, really positive way, which has been really, really good. But like a lot of the technology vendors, there was a huge incentive to kind of put last click through as an attribution methodology. But of course, I think the problem with modeling based on touch is it tells us who handled the demand, but it's not telling us who walked in the door. Do you know what I mean? So it's like if you're in a hotel and someone walks in the front door and you go, oh, well, the concierge is credited for the sale. It doesn't really make a lot of sense when you think about the principles of marketing. What modelling tries to do is it tries to go, well, let's not look at the individuals walking through the door. Let's just see if we kind of increased, billboards in front of Airport X. In that time period, did we see a lift in the overall amount of people walking through the door? And so it starts to give you a much more holistic picture. The downside to that is you don't know whether or not Bob walked in for X reason. But I think that's probably a healthier place to be anyway. Like, I think measurement in kind of, 2012 to 2018 was getting far too close to a surveillance state. And if you look at where marketing has been, I don't think many of us would be comfortable as consumers with the measurement methodologies that our industry espoused for the past 10 years.
So you've kind of given up on causation and you're just looking for a whole lot of really healthy correlations.
Yeah, but that's true. Yeah. So I think that's the risk of models. But the good thing is when you have large enough sample size, right? It's like in science. If you're dealing with a market mix model and you're doing it in-house, you've only got one data set to look at. So you don't really get a very good general sense of the observations. Whereas if you're dealing with a massive amount of, you know, you can observe this happening across lots and lots of different categories and things like that, you get a really good sense of the general dynamics of how something works. And so I think, you know, as you would know, being a consumer psychologist, Adam.
I don't know much more about this other than that statement of you've given up on causation and you're now looking at correlation.
I think the thing about causation is like, what is touch-based stuff causation, or is that just it's just a smarter way to, it's just a sexier way to do correlation. And so I think that's the real problem, is we need to try to look for and understand how marketing is being driven in a general sense, understand the general principles of what drives effectiveness, and then understand what's driving memorability.
There's a lot of talk at the moment. So this is about measurement of creativity, and I'm going to say something that's a little bit, I don't even want to say this publicly, but I will. There's a lot of conversations around the cost of being boring at the moment, and boring ads are going to be inexpensive and so on. Ehrenberg Bass principles once got told to me that basically it's just the efficient deployment of your logo is what it all boils down to, which is pretty reductive and cynical. But it's kind of like put your logo everywhere, create memorability, and people see it. There's also a whole lot of stuff around low involvement processing, the kind of a more wallpapery is your ad. The less people pay literal attention to it, the more it kind of seeps into the brain. And so there is a lot of arguments to be had for really basic, good soundtrack, pretty kind of banal advertising. And that's not the main rhetoric. The main rhetoric is always kind of be as creative as possible. And I'm just wondering, is there hardcore evidence? Is there really good evidence that?
So I think there's evidence that creative makes the channel work harder, right? But it doesn't. It modifies the volume of spend that you have in place. Like, can you make $1 million of spend look a little bit more like 1.5 with great creative? I think that's the underlying principle of great creative, is you're not actually really, like, if you think about what we all do with media, we all have limited budgets. We're all basically competing as big brands with the same budgets. The only way that a big brand can get advantage is to make 20 million look like 30. And so I think that's the real underlying modifier that creative provides. Now, if you're a massive brand who can just outspend the shit out of everybody, well, yeah, you might not need that. Like, because ultimately, you know, if you've got an 80% market share, you can consistently spend at that and things like that. Maybe you don't need to be as creative, because actually everyone else is going to have to work way harder to cut through against you. And so I think that's the really interesting challenge, is we kind of always try to think about creative in the abstract. What's creative actually there to do? It's to modify the creative, the volume of media spend to make it seem like it's operating at a much higher value.
And do you see, because one of the things that, you know, we really see on our brand is a massive difference between how customers feel and non-customers feel. And it's a very different job. Do you see that in your models? Do you see that, you know, sometimes the way a non-customer will react to something is quite different to how a customer will react? Did you kind of cut it that way?
Yeah, and we actually have to model them separately a lot of the time. Yeah, right. Yeah, so I'll give a really good example of this, perhaps not in the space of like advertising, but in like owned media. Customer versus non-customer in owned media. Owned media will brilliantly cross-sell, but it'll do basically nothing for a non-customer. It doesn't matter how much you're investing in your own media program. It's not going to be a strong detectable signal. Content marketing, I think, was, you know, hugely popular years and years ago. It was like very measurable, you know, able to attract vast audiences and things like that. We've seen very little evidence that actually drives a huge commercial result and improves market share in brands. Whereas, yeah, so I think you definitely see different channels working differently, different media working differently, messaging working differently, all of that kind of stuff.
Adam,
Yeah?
is this an ad?
This is an ad for Mutinex. Mutinex are a marketing mix modelling company.
Why do I need one of those?
Well, then you can model the return on every single marketing decision you do.
So you wouldn't do an ad like this?
You would never have to do an ad like this ever again.
Mutinex GrowthOS, your best decisions start here. For more information or to request a demo, visit mutinex.co. That's mutinex.co.
Some years ago, there was a book called Integrated Marketing Communications, was actually the title of a book. And it spoke about...
Cost of dull. Did that actually sell?
I don't know. There was a copy on I
Didn't
think
write it,
the
did you?
IPA, it was on my desk for years. But it spoke about having matching luggage was not necessarily the best way to do consistency across channels. Brent, on your latest campaign, has taken that to the most absurd degree, where nothing is consistent at all. Like it's not.
No,
it-
come
it's-
on.
Ah.
We're going to have an argument.
No,
in front
not
of
an
these
argument,
lovely-
an,
in front of these
an exploration.
lovely people.
But like,
No, but like we've talked about this. Honestly, I feel pretty strongly about this. I think there's a very strong narrative at the moment around consistency. Ritson's really banging that drum. Your mates at System 1 are really banging that drum. And I think there's a very narrow view of consistency, which is it all has to look the same. I believe that consistency is about it feeling the same. And I actually think, you know, putting the same thing everywhere, I think is lazy. I think you actually have to have creative that's fit for platform. I think it's really important. But we tend to narrow fit for platform down to different social platforms. But out of home's a platform, and it needs its own, I believe, its own creative, which is different to what you do on television. I strongly believe that. But I would say, look at the world's most valuable brand, it's Apple, and tell me any Apple execution that has ever looked the same. They are constantly new and different, but it always feels like an Apple ad. You know it's an Apple ad
Because?
because it feels like an Apple ad.
It
You know,
doesn't
they've
feel
got
like an
very
Apple ad.
clear-
The product is
Also central. That's
Absolutely
fair too. That's
central.
fair too. That's fair too. That don't really make brand ads.
I mean, do all Apple ads look different?
Yeah, they do. I
Like-
mean, they have a huge range of. Honestly, I could take shot from iPhone, right? Take shot from iPhone versus like the Lost Voice thing they did recently that Taika Waititi directed with that big sort of weird furry monster thing in it. The little fuzzy Christmas one they did. I mean, they have quite a lot of executional diversity, and also they really don't run the same creative in every channel. Anyway, look, it's easy to be an Apple fanboy, but it is the most valuable brand in the world for a reason. Yet it's not a brand that does the same thing in every channel all the time.
how would you? A question for you, and then a question for you. How would you kind of educate marketers to get feeling-based consistency across channel?
You make it sound so fluffy and like it's loaded.
And then
like a lot
my
of loaded.
question for you is Henry, is how would you measure that?
Well, I think if you've got a clear brand idea and you've got a clear brand voice, then any marketer worth their salt can understand if it's on brand or not. Right? Like, I don't think they need a lot of teaching. But that said, we spend a lot of time, we've got our dial, we spend a lot of time looking at the work. I'm very hands-on in the work. We spend a lot of time talking about the work, debating the work. The work isn't just sort of this thing that we pay a lot of attention to that, and I think therefore people in my team have a very strong understanding of what's on brand and what's not.
I think it's next level. I think it's very high level marketing because I think the executional elements being consistent help you go, right, this is all working together. It's all building the same brand in the consumer's mind because it all kind of looks the same. To do that by feeling is ambitious, and I don't even quite know what it is. But I'm not saying it's right or wrong; just worth exploring.
Kind of saying it's not right. Anyway, Henry, how would you measure it, Henry?
I mean, I think the short answer is any measurement person will tell you split two states out and test two states.
My
Test two
favourite.
separate-
I love this because
separate
before I love you say that because before you were talking about the difference between causation and correlation. I'm a massive fan of doing exactly that, of putting work into the market in a real way, getting people to have a real response to it. So when we sort of started our journey on we need to invest more in brand, we did exactly that. Picked one state, we put way more brand spend in there, and it was we could very quickly work out what impact it had on store traffic, on e-commerce orders, on everything we needed to measure. But it was real, and it wasn't a hypothesis, and it's pretty easy to do. It's pretty easy to carve out one territory and do something different in that territory, and I'm a massive, massive fan of that, versus pre-testing things which isn't real. So I'm a big fan.
Pretty much every market mix model is going to geography. If they don't, they're like a mile behind. But for that exact reason, because what you actually get is you enable the marketers to basically split out between different states, but then the models, like machine learning models, are looking to pick up new information, right? So they're able to actually just pick up what you're seeing in the data and extrapolate it out to the whole model really, really quickly. And so I think that's kind of something really interesting that's happening at the moment. And so, when you're talking about state-based at scale and stuff like that, it's how do you scale what we used to do by just looking at one state to another and then actually really start to isolate the variables even harder. So you can kind of go, okay, like in this state, like us kind of pushing price and all that sort of thing, that makes it way, way more effective. And we can kind of see that because we've got a control group on this other state. So, I mean, that splitting of data, that's absolutely where everybody's going to go in measurement. And I think whether it be creative, whether it be economic testing, everything, that's where the entire market has to go for kind of modelling and measurement. Because if you don't have, I always say granularity is clarity. My Mutinex people in the room will know that saying very well. But like, it's true. Like, if you understand things in the granular detail, if you let things kind of play out in more granularity across data models, you get a lot more clearer indication.
That should have been your black T-shirt last time you came on. Granularity is clarity.
So
like
making stuff, put it in market and test it.
100%.
Yep, that's what you do, and that's expensive. How do you, or maybe it's a cultural question, how do you build a culture around doing that? Because that's, again, it's not kind of how a lot of marketing departments have been built.
Brent will have a better view on this than me, but I think that realistically, how you build a culture around testing and talking commercially by actually helping marketers realise that doing that is what unlocks our value in the boardroom. Like, if you're looking at where we have been ages ago, like I remember early in my career, we used to report up to boards and things like that, like Facebook likes. Like, it was embarrassing. and now, like the job of a marketer increasingly is to say, here's how much revenue growth we can deliver. And by the way, if you give me another 20% in headroom and budget, this is how much more we can deliver. If you allow us to produce a better creative asset, here's how much more we can deliver. And that's the conversation that puts marketing on the front foot, whether it be, coming into tough economic times. Like, that's the position you want to be in. You don't want to be in these positions where we're getting dictated to about whether or not we're worth something in a business. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, amen. To answer your question around, that sounds complicated and kind of hard, I'd say two things. Every marketing department right now is making way too much stuff. I think we've all bought this sort of idea that we live in this social age and we've got to move at the speed of culture, so we've got to make lots and lots of stuff. And you don't. You don't. We have decreased the amount we make, 25% the first year, 25% the second year, ROI has gone up 75%. Like, we're making too much stuff. So I'd start there, like maybe make a bit less, and then create the room to be able to experiment and try things and do things differently. So trying to making all this content. And then if it's just a test, like, we should spend more brand in this. I mean, how much it takes OMD like 5 minutes to buy more media in that state? Maybe not 5 minutes. Sorry, Danny Bass in the room. But you know what I mean? How hard is it? Like buy a bit more brand in that state. It's not hard. I mean, it's not that much work.
Nine has an ads manager now. You can buy TV online.
It's like all the media people in the room hate me. They're like, that does not take 5 minutes. That's like a lot of work from 33% of an FTE for 4 weeks.
So you mentioned before, you had a kind of little backhander around qualitative research and putting 6 people in a focus group room.
You mentioned soggy sandwiches.
My little quote on that is, the only thing focus groups are good for is for assessing focus group rooms. So if you're in the focus group room market.
Who goes to focus groups? I just don't understand who's got
Show
the
hands.
time.
Who in this room?
Been to one?
Who's been to a focus group? Show hands. Oh, that's surprising.
That shocks me, genuinely.
Okay, another question. Who in the room has answered a brand tracking survey in the last 12 months? Shit,
wow.
wow. There's quite a few. Wow, okay. I'm surprised. Okay, great. Did that prove anything?
Does it play a role in creative measurement?
Look, I'm no expert on focus groups, so I'll just preface everything with that. I think I have not seen them have any sort of
qualitative research in general, not just
qual. Yes. So I think if you're assessing qual, you're trying to understand kind of where ideas can go. I'm a huge fan of the Ideally crew. For starting to kind of explore ideas and things like that.
Was that like a sponsorship crossover? Mutinex talking about Ideally. There are two sponsors. There are two sponsors on black t-shirts.
Mutinex Ideally just naturally cross over on everything. So But I think they're doing some really interesting stuff. I think like there's another really fascinating business called Evidanza, which is run by a group called John Lombardo, a guy called John Lombardo in the States. And like they're doing really interesting stuff to try to simulate responses using the LLMs, because the theory goes that the LLMs kind of represent, most of the junk on the internet. So can we simulate how someone will respond qualitatively to things and stuff like that? And I think that's a very interesting business as well. So I think the big problem with qual is like the environment for collecting it through traditional focus groups is slow, controlled. It doesn't really work to produce mass level insight quickly. And I think that's the real problem with it. It's the sample quality rather over anything else.
There's been a lot said, mainly by Ritson, about how the US is behind when it comes to effectiveness of marketing science and things. You've obviously spending quite a lot of time in the States. I know you're picking up business in the States, which is great. What's your take? Do you think the American clients are behind when it comes to effectiveness of science? Are they ahead? How would you...
So I think the American mindset is slightly different. So I think if you look at the US market, there's like 52 states. A lot of them are, or 51 states, whatever. A lot of them are like very large places to operate.
50, right?
50, I don't know, something like that.
I lived there for 8 years and I don't know the answer.
50.
But I think the most fascinating thing about the US market is they don't reference the principles of effectiveness the same way we would. So I think if we're in this market, we like to really think through kind of the activities that we're doing, understand why we're doing what we're doing. In the States, the bias towards action is really high. So they can kind of iterate their way to an effectiveness principle without needing to know what that principle necessarily is. And they're very attuned to the data that way. So to give you a sense of it, we had a customer off an MMM, which I was kind of talking about before, move around probably 35% of their budget within 2 weeks of launching. And this is a serious budget, bigger than anything in Australia. And they moved around 35% of their budget within 2 weeks of the MMM launching and going live, which that astounded me. Like that just, it just wouldn't be something that you would see in any other market.
You don't think that's too quick? Don't you model guys normally say let the model settle down, give it time?
I thought it was very quick. Yeah, I thought it was very quick. But they wanted to run tests. They wanted to test it, and their whole position was, well, this is not a two-way door. A one-way door. Like we can just revert back if it's kind of not working and we're not seeing the result. And I think that's a very American kind of attitude to have in that space. I think in Australia we're a lot more considered and we kind of think through the problems a lot more and we want to understand the why a lot more, which is really healthy. But in the US market, that they kind of want to iterate their way and have that bias to action. They pride themselves on that as a culture.
If we let's say we all value creativity in the world of building brands, imagine we started a research culture today that could effectively research and measure the role that creativity played in building a brand. How do you go about that? Scrap everything that's been done. What would you do?
I think you would have a creative pre-testing system to some degree, or something something that tracks the responsive ads, directly linked to a market mix model, and you would have all the market mix models set up around creative first, channel second. So the fact that most market mix models operate without kind of analysing the creative and seeing the channel effectiveness varying significantly with each piece of creative, I think that is a fundamental structural flaw in how every piece of legacy MMM has been set up. And so that's where you would start. How do we firstly create a rich data point around how good was the creative and numeric quantification of that? And then the second would be then link that to the performance of the models, how the model's able to analyse information. I've actually seen I'm not sure if you're doing this, Brent, so maybe you can tell us, but
I'm not doing that.
I've seen the internal scores as well, like the internal scoring be put into the MMMs before. And that's actually worked quite well for a few very large businesses.
The internal scoring of the creativity, how creative they think it is, and putting that into an MMM.
Correct.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, so I've seen that practice put in place before. Not as effective as the pre-testing, but it definitely had some predictive power. And so I think that was just like, you would rebuild the whole kind of premise of MMM to be built around thinking creative first and then modifying the effectiveness of the channel. And I think it took us 2 years to work that out. It wasn't something that we immediately found. But actually, that was the key unlock for us to actually understand how, effectiveness of a media channel was changing over time. Because it was so easy for us to say, we should see effectiveness change over time. But actually, the key variable that dictates that is the creative. And no model considers it explicitly. So it's crazy.
What about the pub test? What role does that have in the future of the perfect model? Anyway, something we do on the show is a pub test. We're going to try our first ever live pub test. Slight problem that none of you are drinking, but that's okay. Speaking of drinking, there are drinks next door as soon as this finishes, brought to you by Mutinex as well, so thank you, Mutinex. Anyway, we're going to do a pub test.
The pub test is brought to you by Ideally, the insights platform where ideas go to grow.
Here's what's going to happen. So Henry is going to give you the pub pitch on marketing mix modelling, right?
On Mutinex.
On the Mutinex pub pitch test, yes. And then what we're going to do is we're going to give it the pub test. It either passes the pub test or it doesn't, and we're going to do that live. Don't worry, we'll get through that in a minute. So, Henry, you're in a pub. You're not talking to, a CMO. You're in the pub, and you're going to tell the pub why they need marketing mix modelling Mutinex and what it is in how many words?
In
Like
2 minutes. But the
minutes.
pub is full of people who are interested in buying or measuring creativity.
So am I with CMOs or not? It's
yeah,
not-
you are. You are. I reckon you are.
Oh, you are. I thought it was
Yeah.
a pub test. Oh, okay.
But the pub's full
full of CMOs.
Yeah. It's a fucking boring pub. No
No,
offense,
well-
Brent.
No, we're all too busy to be at the pub. Okay, so all right.
Look,
but
I
the problem is this isn't a room full of CMOs. This doesn't work. This isn't a room full of CMOs. You want them to pretend they're CMOs?
Yeah. When I say a room full of CMOs, it's a room full of people who are interested in...
So I would have thought people who are at South by
Mutinex.
Southwest, part of the sort of, brand and marketing track or whatever we are, would have that interest, Adam. But that's okay.
I'm summing them... Yes. So
Yeah?
you're in a pub with these people.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. But that's okay. I'm glad you clarified. So you got the brief, Henry. You get it? All right. So here it is. This is your pub pitch for Mutinex.
Mutinex GrowthOS is a platform that allows you to quantify and measure the value of your creativity as it affects your media.
That's it. That was sharp. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. This is the pub test, live pub test. So if you think that passes the pub test, we're thumbs up. If we think it doesn't pass the pub test,
Gladiator.
we're thumbs down. Okay? So let's go. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Let's see. Oh, what do you reckon, Adam? What do you reckon?
I think it passes.
It's got
it
more
definitely
up. We've got
passes
more
the
thumbs
pub-
up than
definitely
thumbs.
passes the pub test.
You know why I like Ideally, Adam?
Why, Brent?
It's fast. You get insights overnight. And I think the main thing is it's not trying to test whether an idea should live or die, but it's trying to give you real insights that you can build on and make the creative better.
That sounded like an ad.
Because it was.
Do you know why I like Ideally?
Why?
Because they sponsor the black T-shirts.
They do.
If you want to do a pub test on your own, don't. Go to Ideally instead.
That's right. Visit goideally.com. That's goideally.com and find out how they can help.
For those who has no, why? And we'll repeat your answers. Do you want to, yeah, if you... Sorry?
Yeah, it's fair.
There's no how.
Well, look, I can present about 2 hours of statistical methodology if you'd all like. Just
I
make
was
certain reach next-
on the
but
call.
see-
I was on the call to a vendor of a service, and he goes, "Mate, it's maths." I was like, what the fuck does that mean?
No, but
So, in
but
fairness
hey,
to
hey,
the-
I feel
I think I know who that vendor is, actually.
I feel a bit for Henry here. I feel like this is when I do a brand ad. People go, "Well, I want proof points." He's trying to give you the high level, concept. No, you want more. I want slides. I want graphs. I want more fun. Now, there's a good answer. I want more fun. I want more fun. There you go. That's
Hang on, what are you saying?
I like the hustle and I like the slickness, but I want
Oh, that's great feedback.
That's really good.
So,
What was that?
Henry, can you give us just a little bit of how?
Well, I think the way we do it is you're basically modelling, as Adam said, correlations, but you're modelling correlations at scale. So you're looking at, as you do more of one thing in 1 week, how does that affect that week and subsequent weeks? And you're just doing that at scale, simulating lots and lots and lots of times. So if you're able to roll the dice 10,000 times on what will happen, you get a pretty good sense of it.
And the thing I love about models too, right, is I think, the sales team come in and they expect marketing to drive 100% of the sales target. And what I love that the models do, they start actually going, well, you know what, marketing can only affect this much because things like the weather and public holidays and what your competitors are doing, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of things that are going to affect sales, but I think there's an expectation internally that marketing will deliver 100% of the sales target. It's just
The really weird one at the moment is like lots of marketing teams are getting like hammered because sales are in decline and stuff like that. But it's almost like the entire internal finance teams have forgotten the state of the economy. Like we've had the interest rates skyrocket, and that's actually
but they remember it when things are working because it's not marketing.
exactly.
It is the economy. You know what I mean?
Exactly. So I think it's a really interesting tension in measurement, right? Because like it's become increasingly hard. Like every time the sales trend starts dipping, it's like no, the economy's hammering us like 10%. We've got to make up negative 10% of ground just to stay afloat in the economy. And I think when you can't measure that stuff, it's so hard to make that argument back. And I think increasingly that's the conversation we're having a lot at the moment. It's like marketing is not declining in effectiveness. It's the market has fundamentally changed from underneath us as the rate rises have skyrocketed.
And those beer prices have gone up.
In behavioural economics, there's this concept of bounded rationality, that we have limitations to how we can be rational. So the world's very, very confusing, and we can only make pretty good decisions under set circumstances. If I took that same approach to MMMs, what are the boundaries of setting up those correlations that work? Like, can you, for example, do an MMM on every business decision a company will make?
No, that's hard.
So what are the boundaries of the conditions?
I think like there's two big ones I always look at. Like you can't really there is a limit to how granular we can go. We can go pretty granular, but you can't look at kind of slow moving effects in a business and stuff like that through an MMM. It's really, really difficult. So if I kind of
An example of a slow moving effect.
So if there's like a general slow growth in the category that's pretty hard to detect, you'll see that ticking up in a baseline, but you won't really see it ticking up overall.
Should I improve my call centre or my packaging?
I don't think the MMMs are there yet. I think they should be, but like not even we're there yet.
So what they're really good at is
Market forces.
And channel spend?
Channel spend 100%. They can go down to format, publisher, creative assets, all of that sort of stuff now. I think the other kind of big one is, and I think it kind of like taking it back to the start of the conversation, it's like I do think sometimes people rely on MMMs to figure out where the leap is. And I don't think that they can do that well at all.
Yeah,
and
great.
so I think that's a huge problem with data is what data is really good at doing is it's good at telling us where to look, but it's not good at telling us where to leap. And I think that's a huge problem with the sector is we're confusing it. Like you should ground yourself in data as the starting point, but it should never define your end point. And I think too often we use data as the end point, and we almost use everything else as the start point. So we've got our process inverted. Data starts you off; it doesn't finish what you do.
And peanut MMMs or no? And so, hey, listen. What we're going to do now is we're going to throw some questions to the pub. So if anyone has got a question they would like to ask Henry, we're going to take some questions from the floor.
Or these guys as well. Just
No, mate, you're our special guest. You're the smart one. Yeah, okay. Or Adam and I, if you want to ask a question as well. Come on, who's got a question? Yeah, great. Just say your name and where you're from, and yeah.
My name's Steve. I'm from New Zealand, Genesis Energy. I apologise, I've not heard of Mutinex. I don't know if it's an Australian company or not, sorry. But you obviously do M&Ms, but you added in that you add in creativity. I'm used to just media mix modelling, just media channels. So
media mix is no good.
Yeah, okay. So how does that work? How does the creativity get modelled in? How do you measure that and add it in to give you a number? I don't quite understand.
Yeah, so you've got to think about what creative is fueled by and what I was saying about media, right? So creative and media are not separated things. They're like for every creative asset or campaign that we run, we've got a bucket of spend that is assigned to that creative campaign, right? Like you know that there's $1 million in creative X versus 500K in creative Y. And what that allows you to do is actually see the effectiveness of that creative differently. So you can say to a model, actually, I've got here's what we know about both of those creative campaigns, and I've got an assumption that those creative campaigns mean a difference in effectiveness between channel. And so that actually allows us to look at it creative first. And there's a concept called ad stock. You may or may not be familiar with that in an MMM. In a traditional market mix model, ad stock would never change, right, in a channel over the course of a year. But it should, because that's actually your primary method, like memorability measure. Ad stock is directly correlated to memorability. And so every time you're changing the campaign, you should see a change in ad stock. Yet no MMM does that. Why? And it's because they don't bake the creative into the hierarchy. And so you actually start to see the limitations of it in a very real way. Whenever you point that ad stock thing out to a marketer, they go, oh yeah. But it's like, it's the most obvious thing, but it's just no vendor will talk about it.
And just on the changing outside, so do you see a difference between, because again, I'm coming back to this narrative around consistency. I mean, there's a lot of talk at the moment, like a lot of markets, you're better off make no changes, leave it alone, versus, new creative, which I clearly don't agree with, Adam. But do you see a change in consistent ad stock over a year versus changing ad stock, or is that a very loaded question? Because if the changes are good versus bad, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it is a loaded question in the sense that if you change from a really bad piece of creative to a really good piece of creative, you'll probably see an improvement in the ad stock anyway. But what you will see is an ad stock will generally build up a little bit to a point over time, and then at some stage it will start to fatigue.
Because that's a debate too, right?
Yeah, but I will say that it's exceptionally rare, if not nigh, like I would say I've only seen it a very few times, that the ad stock has gone into a decline mode. I think marketers get a lot more bored of their ads than consumers do.
And just to round out your question, I used to think MMM stood for media mix modelling. Then the name changed to market mix modelling. And so I think that comes back to the question around that, my clumsy question around bounded rationality. What is it that you're modelling? Is it the media spend, or is it the marketing capabilities of the organisation? Any other questions? It's a pretty heady thing to jump into, so I appreciate any question.
Thank you. I'm Kerry from the Youth Cancer Charity Canteen. I actually did have a question for you, Brent. Sorry. Sure. But I'd love to, if you're willing to share, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the internal creative scorecard you apply.
It's weird if I do it here, isn't it? I'll come back at the front. So we call it the Telstra dial.
Get it?
Yeah, see what we did there? It's a hark back to our legacy when you used to dial phone. Yeah, okay. And as I said earlier, we were really inspired by AB InBev, who have won Car Market of the Year 2 years in a row. And basically, look, it's all qualitative, right? And I've been asked this a lot. Like, do you actually then use quant to then, in any way, prove out the scores or whatever? It's totally qual, and it's not linked to market effectiveness either. And it's a really simple and obvious tool. And I'm amazed that more marketers don't do it. And it does a couple of things. I think what's really, really important in any marketing culture that wants to do great creativity, not just average creativity, is you need real intellectual honesty about where the work's at. And there's been, I don't have all the fancy psychological terms like Adam, but there's pretty good papers written about that psychological safety is not enough. You actually need intellectual honesty as well. and that needs a bit of sort of edge to it and a bit of obviously honesty to it and the ability to have a very sort of robust conversation about the work. So the first thing you got to do is you got to level set everyone on what's great, because that's a word we throw around. Great job, Was it great or was it just kind of good? Because I always say there's only one barrier reef in the world that's great, and there's only one wall that you can see from space that's great. There's lots of good walls and lots of good reefs, but there's only two that are good. You know what I mean? So I think great means something. So, but unless you take the time to really define what great means and what great looks like, I think you can have a lot of cross conversations about the work. So we, the scale just really clearly maps out. If 10's a titanium at Cannes, which is what it is on our scale, we're not going to get a lot of 10s. And if 6 are finalists in an award show, and 5 is a really solid, effective piece of work, and then I think we call 3 a yawn. Is that right? Zane, who works for me and runs the dials over there. Yeah, 3's a yawn. And everything between. And we spend a lot of time on the language and what we call it and what it looks like. We've got examples, working with Can on examples of what a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 looks like from all around the world. And obviously now we're building up a big catalogue of our own work of what a 6, 4 and a 5 and what it all looks like. And the really important thing is we sit down every single quarter and we dedicate 3 or 4 hours to mark every single piece of work, and that's a feedback loop back into the teams of where we think the work's at. It's really laborious. It's incredibly methodical.
It sounds fun. So you're assessing your own work after it's gone out into the market.
Correct.
With independent of whether it's been successful,
yeah,
effective or not.
That's then a different conversation we have in PIRs, and we're not trying to over-engineer it where we're linking it to in-market. So it's just to have its whole reason for it is to have a very honest conversation about where's the work at. I want
to put and that's all post. So having to make the work. I just want to, just because we can share in this room, we're kind of interested in this stuff. One of the things which we've done at our agency is do something called the expert panel. So there isn't any kind of pre-creative work that's been validated independently. So no quant pre-testing has been validated independently, and some of the vendors of that, and especially System 1, would have a lot to say about that, but then they should get their stuff independently assessed. But one of the things we do is, we kind of give creative work to what we call the expert panel. So we give them the brief, we give them the proposed solution, and then we give them a structured questionnaire to answer about what they think will be memorable about that, how branded is it, and so forth. And that structured questionnaire to an independent bunch of experts will help inform the creative development. And that can be a quick, cost-effective, interesting alternative to pre-testing. But there are other forms.
And talk about who's on the expert panel, because you've got quite interesting, varied, not the actual names, but I mean what they do in terms of background.
So there'll be marketing scientists, marketing professors, a couple of accomplished strategists.
Don't work for you, importantly, so they're truly independent, right?
No relationship with us at all.
Yeah, I think that's really, really smart. You also have an expert panel up here who you can ask questions to. So is there any other questions from the audience? One more, come on, let's go. Here.
Yeah, hi, I'm Emma Ridley from the brand agency in Perth. Probably a question for whoever wants to pick it up, probably leading on to from your point, Adam. Often we're found in this chicken and egg scenario where the client needs some kind of evidence to take to exec or the board to buy into a very early creative concept for then us to progress. Have you got any advice for either the agencies or clients in the room on how you get them to buy into that?
I mean, the first bit of advice is never take creative to the board before it's made, would be my first bit of advice. I think it's crazy taking a creative concept to a board when you haven't made it. I mean, what about letting management manage the business, Anyway.
It's a tough question. It just kind of depends. I'd try to get an independent voice in there, but often that independent voice comes from the agency that's made it, which isn't necessarily ideal. We would look to marketing sciences or the principles behind why it's going to work and try to have a conversation around that rather than necessarily the creative piece of work itself. So that's that's the main way I'll do that. And then there are good research tools that help you get evidence quickly. That you can then, if it depends it depends a little bit culturally how that organisation runs. Does it run by the voice of a consumer? Is it an intellectual culture? So I'll try to tap into the culture of the business and try to slide into that.
So when I was working with both in creative agencies many years ago, with both Matt Ferrugia and Aidan Hepburn, we had
both in the audience.
Both in the audience, but. We actually had a tactic that we would use when we had to send something up to get a big creative budget approved. And we called it the BFN, which was the big fucking number. And you just basically went and present it because realistically, they don't really care about the input. They care about the outcome. And so the way you presented it is just never actually present the thing. You'd say, look, here's the problem we're trying to fix, with flat growth or whatever. We believe that this idea directly links to X amount in growth. The reason that we need to do it like this is to make the media more effective. And just by laying out the logical commercial argument, it generally got received a lot better. You had to describe, because every single person in a board is basically at some stage trained by McKinsey. And the way that someone at McKinsey will tell you that they write is that they write outcome first, then they write input. It's called pyramid writing by McKinsey, and it's one of the most helpful things you can study if you want to understand boards. And you just write outcome first. And pretty much every single person in an agency, because you're trained to create lots and lots of inputs, writes input first. And so it's just the least helpful thing you can do when looking for budgets to be approved.
And that was my suggestion.
No, but the other thing I'd say, we had a really interesting guest on the pod this season, Wanda Pogue from VaynerMedia. I think the way VaynerMedia is thinking about creativity is really interesting. So their idea is you basically create a whole lot of content for a whole bunch of different cohorts. You make it cheaply, cost effectively, you put it out into the world, and you actually see what gains traction, and then you scale that. I think that's a very interesting conversation to have with people who are very rational, who want to see some sort of predictive element. That's the hardest thing, right? You're going in with an idea, you've got no way to predict whether it's going to work really. And I think they want to see certain very rational people want to see. So I think what's interesting about that model is, hey, look, we've done all this stuff. We've put it out into the world, and you haven't spent a whole lot of money on it, and we've got these signals, and we've got these learnings, and we think this is the thing we're going to scale, and here's why. I think that's a really interesting way to maybe engage with those types of boards and things. But I think ultimately I would say I'm very fortunate, working at Telstra, that the leadership of the company, trusts and supports me as a chief marketing officer.
Do you know why they trust and support him? Because he knows, I reckon it's because he knows what he's good at. And so, Henry, I don't reckon we should be training people to be quasi-CFOs if they're not. So one of the best briefs I ever had was from a FMCG CMO who had a new product, and he said, I want to set up a behaviour change program for the buyer at Coles or Woolies, can't remember which one. So work with me on how to change that person's behaviour when I present the information that they go, yeah, cool, I'll buy that particular thing. And I just love the fact, I love the focus of the creativity to try to apply our skills to orchestrate a behaviour change program to get that person to say yes. So back to your original question, if you've got a board, you've got a piece of creativity, I would apply creativity and marketing to the challenge of the board and come up with a solution to that. And that will most likely be aligned to the culture of that business.
That's very good. One last question, and then we do have drinks next door. We have drinks next door right here. Danny Bass, do you have a question? No, sitting next to Danny Bass has a question. Now.
Thanks. Natasha from Swiss Wellness. Just had a question. I think you guys sort of talked about it, but in terms of that creative model, how, it seems very internal. Do you, look at it from a consumer perspective, and what consumer outcomes would be? Do they understand the creative, or is it very much based from an internal branding point of view?
Let me answer your question. I'll run back up. It is internal when we're sort of scoring the creative, because that conversation is, I think, a conversation that you need a certain level of expertise and a certain level of taste. And I don't think you can ask consumers, is this good, is this great? But of course we get consumer feedback once we put it into the world. I mean, we're tracking it, we're getting instant feedback in our social channels. We've got lots of tracking. We've got a model. Like, we've got all sorts of consumer inputs happening all the time. But I think it's really, really dangerous. And he wrote a book about it, to ask customers if this is any good. It's the old Henry Ford. They'll tell you they want a faster horse. They'll tell you to make stuff that they're comfortable with. They'll tell you to make stuff how they expect the category to look. You know, they'll want it to look like every other telco ad or every other bank ad. So I think customer input's vital at the start of the process, and I'm a massive fan of ethnographic and deep qual and really understanding the customer intimately. And also, I always say desks are a really dangerous place to do marketing from. Get out into the stores, get out and talk to customers, get all those inputs. Vital. But I think it's super, super dangerous to ask customers, is this any good creatively? And I think I think human-centered design is fantastic because we've got much more customer focus and we've got much more customer input, and I think we're solving customer problems and trying to design experiences is critical. But I think when we're trying to do a creative execution, I think it's super dangerous. I really do. So no, it's much more our expertise, our taste, where we're trying to take the brand. How do we think this creative is working?
I just spend as much time as I can understanding the dynamics of the category, being really, really clear what the rules are of the category, how the category operates, how consumers navigate within that category. Understand that really, really clearly, and then fuck with it as much as you can, but only within the boundaries of the category you're operating in. So be category focused, not necessarily consumer or brand, and then take your brand into that category.
I agree. No, I agree. I think breaking the convention of the category is, I think, really important. Okay. Are we done?
Any final?
Oh, we do have another question.
Oh, so
do you work at Aussie Broadband? Oh my goodness, the competition are here on the second row. Congratulations, you've got great business.
Honoured to be thought of as the competition of Telstra. You made a comment before, Brent, about you do a lot less than you used to. From my perspective...
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. My God, what were you doing before?
Can you clarify that? Because I guess from my perspective, being very close to telco and obviously following everything you do, and it's all in our Slack channels and we're commenting on it, what we think, etc., seems like there's plenty coming out. So what's less?
We are creating less, but we're doing more big visible things. So I'm pleased you're seeing it, but we're doing less of the real long tail of really small things that quickly fragment your budget and quickly fragment your brand in the customer's eyes. And so
Get rid of what?
Fewer, bigger, better is our mantra. So
what are you doing less of?
We're doing less of constant retail offers all the time. Instead, do like a bigger, retail event that sort of has more impact. We're just doing like, look, Telstra is a very big organisation. We've got lots and lots of products. We've got lots and lots of, a lot of agile missions who want to spin up work. And I think the thing that we want to do is just make sure that, the stuff we do has real impact in the marketplace. So fewer, bigger, better is our mantra. We're doing less. I love that it feels like more. I actually quite love that. But we are definitely trying to make sure that everything we do has real impact. And we're definitely, I can tell you it's down 25% year on year, 2 years in a row, the amount we're doing. So.
Alrighty. One final question.
Oh my God! Oh, jeez. We'll get your mic so you're on the podcast. Yeah.
In terms of market mix modelling, how do you see the potential for those models in the future to really account for the non-trackable things like word of mouth, forums, other I guess, non-digital environments, where, as a business like us, we generated a lot through word of mouth and referrals, and we know that that's a big part of.
It's not actually a modelling problem, right? So the real problem with a lot of like how can we model this, how can we model that, and stuff like that. It's not really can we model it, it's can we collect a high-quality data signal around it that accurately represents it. I think that the chart, from what I can see in the data collection space, like the ability to suck data out from kind of, forums non-permissibly, which has basically been a lot of the tracking systems and the data broking systems, that's getting less and less. So I realistically think that the data limitation is going to get worse and worse in that space, not better. But are there other ways you can track word of mouth? Sure. I think NPS is not a bad signal to include in models. I think one really neat trick we learned is if you get your competitor NPS, that's a really good one to see if the effectiveness of your media is going to improve.
How do you get that?
A lot of people survey competitors post, they're kind of running surveys across the competition and stuff like that. So, and that's a really interesting one because you kind of see, as competitor NPS gets lower, below.
You got ours.
Yeah. So as you see, competitors.
Look how happy he looks.
So as you see, as you see Brent's NPS dip below a certain level, the market's
not going to happen. Our head of CX is in the room, and she would say that's not going to happen, is it, Mira? No, absolutely not.
We check our NPS with our clients. We find it a useful tool. Hey, we're going to wrap up. Henry, if you had to sum up your creative philosophy to measurement on a black T-shirt, what would it be?
Measure creative and media, not creative or media.
That's the worst T-shirt ever, Henry. No, I'm not going to let you have that T-shirt. I liked your granularity's clarity. That's a cool.
That one.
Should we do a pub test on Henry's T-shirt? Quick. I mean, what was it again? Go again. Okay. What was it again? I want him to say it one more time.
I can't even remember.
Yeah. See, exactly. My point exactly.
All right. That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. Good on you. Let's have a drink. God bless.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone.